And we are live with Kenya Bradshaw, Vice President of Strategy. I'm getting this right. You're Vice President of Policy and Community Coalitions with the TNTP project. Prior to that, you have a long background in history. And I don't have to tell you about your own background, but for people listening and watching, and working directly with schools, school systems, and communities to help improve the various things that go into teacher evaluation, teacher preparation, building strong systems internally. And the thing that actually I'm really happy to have you here to talk with us a little bit about today is how do we add the community and family factor into those things that we consider to be wonky school district issues, right?
Yep.
The things that, there's power in how schools are organized and how they prepare their teachers and how they do all that. But that process is often divorced from us, parents, civilians, real people, right? So you're one of the only people that I know really honestly that can talk to us about this, because I know so many people that have one hand in the community side or one hand in the school district side, the smart people and those of us on the outside who aren't considered smart all the time. So I'm happy to have you on this morning. Thank you, Kenya, for coming.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you having me this morning.
It's early.
I'm a fangirl of yours anyway, so it's exciting to be in your nice studio today.
You're one of my heroes in this, and you're one of my heroes in this because of what I just said. I honestly don't know too many people that keep the bridge between home and school.
Yeah.
Right.
Part of that is, I think, a couple things. Until Obama, the role of organizer was not as illuminated as a job. It was the work of the people, and it was the work for people who cared about communities. Those people have always existed. There are people who are doing this work now. What they weren't is informed as education roles, and they didn't have positions in what was the early ed reform movement, other than them being the people who were charged with recruitment. Over time, we have evolved that somewhat. I won't say we are where we need to be, because for me, community engagement is the foundation of anything that we do. We should not be making any decisions without the people who are affected or impacted by those decisions. And we think some things are too complex, but nothing is too complex for the people who are going to be impacted by it. So how do you make it to where they are able to engage?
You think that with President Obama came a new respect for people in the community who actually organize families. But do you think, I noticed you also said, not that we've gotten all the way there yet in what we call education reform. Doesn't it feel like we still have a really long way to go?
We do. And it's not just in the reform community. I would even say in traditional roles in districts, family and community engagement is over there. Like, we do academics, we do operations, we do finance, and they do engagement. When it can be done within the thread of everything that you do. And an example of that is, if you are doing school budgeting, you need to do a community participatory process for budgeting. You should do it both at the school level, but you should also do it across the community. Whereas what we normally do is send the budget that we have designed inside of the district out and say, come in and give comments on the stuff that we've already designed. Well, it doesn't work for people, because the way you engage deeply is when you are a part of the design process. And this is why I believe that we have a profound inequities in schools and in districts across the country, is because the people who are designing this are designing it from a place of theory and some practice, but not from a place of impact. And think differently about how we're getting people who are impacted always at the table.
How do you think we get them to the table? I mean, what a lot of people in districts will say is that's one of their biggest challenges.
A lot of people ain't trying, to be completely honest.
Don't go
Like,
getting honest this early in the morning, can you?
that's how I live this life for them. Hey. So I think that people have an expectation, and like I'll say this, I've had principals and superintendents tell me I really don't want them in my business, and so I just want them to drop their kids off and then let me do what I do. And for me, that actually is the feeling of a lot of people. It isn't from a place of malice. It's just like, we let us do what we're good at, and then you do what you're good at, and you should do what you're doing at home. But we should be thinking about, especially during this time, how we're turning that on its head. We have seen through Rona then brought us some good visions. I don't want her to stay, but she has shown us around virtual engagement.
Now, why Rona gotta be a she? Why Rona gotta be a she?
Actually, you're right, because Rona has Rona really Robert, and Robert around here just breaking bad on folks, because a woman wouldn't have done all this.
You know, one of the things that I'm thinking about when you say, you know, this pandemic has taught us something a little bit. I think having our kids at home, having to scramble and learn what we're doing for our kids is creating a system of, not a system, it's creating a situation where parents now have to wake up on a few things about what our kids are learning, what has been going on. We're noticing some things that we probably wouldn't have noticed if they were going to school every day now. You know Tim Daly, who is a friend that we both know. And Tim said to me recently something that I was already kind of thinking, but it sank in when he said it, was no matter what happens from here going forward, when schools, either when they come back open or don't come back open or whatever, districts won't be able to treat parents as if they are just kind of inconsequential anymore. You can't educate in spite of them, because there's no path forward to catch kids up after this Rona slide that doesn't involve partnership with family and home, school, you know, parent, teacher, educator, whatever. We're all in this now, right? But when I think about that, we were already behind. You all at TNTP did a report a couple of years ago called The Opportunity Myth, which I still don't think has landed. It has some really shocking things in there about the lies we're telling kids. Like, if you come to school, you get good grades, you do well, you will be prepared for college and then for life. And as it turns out, in this Opportunity Myth report that you all put out a couple of years ago, if we just trusted that as parents and believed that all along, we were doing the wrong thing, because in truth, there was a racialized system of our kids not getting grade level work, even though we thought it was grade level work, and we weren't setting them up. When we move forward now as parents, as partners, we put our kids back in schools or whatnot, how do we come back with a sense of power and partnership and really wanting to see the budget, the curriculum and all that stuff? How do we empower, how do we put parents in power, and so that we can lead from the front moving forward?
So Tim is optimistic, and I believe that
he is. He's
revert back to what they know, regardless of what we think. And the reason I believe that, like Frederick Douglass has one of my favorite quotes around, power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, nor will it, and it never will. So unless we are using this time as parents are being even more informed, because they are even more proximal to education now, and they see the gaps that they are having, and we make the bridge connection on, now you've seen this, what are the steps that you're going to do? And we help parents, and parents also ask that of the district. The district will never change just because we think that they will have to do education differently. They might do a delivery in the delivery of the service. It does not mean it will be different in how the content or how we have been lying to children for years. Like, I'm not sure. And what I am concerned about is that we will take an attitude, because of this wrong slide, of just catch up and remediate celebration. And so, and we know that, like, our Opportunity Myth report showed, we were remediating before we ever got into this. So we were giving kids who were in 5th grade, 3rd grade work, they were succeeding on 3rd grade work, and then we were giving them A's at home, but they were never getting to the 5th grade content. And so how are we making sure that we are doing that and really prioritizing acceleration? One of the things that we believe is we need public declaratives that communities and districts are going to say by 2022, we are going to have all kids be on grade level. And this is the strategy, because without those public pieces, you don't have an opportunity for accountability. So if I say I'm going to do it, we set benchmarks towards it. We are watching and monitoring. We are helping build systems throughout the community to be able to do it, because we are going to have to take a more village type approach. So we are going to have to think differently around education beyond these 4 walls. So churches are going to have to think differently about the role that they play in education. In communities that we have large poverty, and many of those employees are going to be essential, regardless of if we have shutdowns again. In addition to us thinking about the child care, we have to think about education delivery. And so those are the conversations that we need to be having, and think about the coordination, the retraining of people to be lay educators at the same time, and to think about how do we use this as a time to expand our thinking about what our children deserve and should have. Like one of the things I would be interested in is how could we go to universal foreign language offerings for all kids across the country right now? Because now I can get on the video with the teacher who specializes in Chinese. And then what I could do is I could have my kids have a lay teacher at a church be able to support that. But we can do 25 different classrooms across the country if we thought differently about how we both staffed and how we delivered education right now.
You know, looking at your report, it said that the success rate of students on grade level work is really similar between kids of color and white kids. But 4 out of 10 classrooms with the majority of students of color never received a single grade level assignment.
And that's what I'm saying, Chris.
4 out of 10. I mean, damn.
We are not even giving them the opportunity to struggle, the opportunity to learn the content. We are just saying, them babies can't get it. So what we're doing is sitting in biases and actually harming our children through some biases about our beliefs that they cannot achieve. Because when children were given work on grade level, 80% of the time they were able to do that. I would rather us tell 80% of the truth than 100% of the lies that we're families.
I mean, what's really stark about this, though, is looking at it. That's for classrooms of color. 4 out of 10 classrooms with the majority of students of color never received a single grade level assignment. There are very few, very small percentage of white classrooms that have that same problem.
But I will say this is where AP data is really illustrative. White kids just as well, we giving them mediocre education, and they don't know it and don't see it until we begin to think about the AP passage rates. So majority of kids don't pass AP, and we're just like, oh, that's tough and difficult, it's hard. Who would allow that if we had these same passages in college? If we had 60% of your kids didn't pass AP at your freshman college, we would think something was wrong with that. But we have accepted that in high school, and instead of thinking about, we actually might need to think differently about the preparation they receive before they get here and the instruction that they are receiving here for them to be adequately prepared to go on to courses. That's where it looks like with white families, but they don't see it because we're doing other kind of activities with them.
Well, we fall into that narrative often too. When we talk about problems in schools, problems in public education, there's a bias towards the fact that all the problems are for people in poverty, people who are poor, people from families of color, people who come from families that aren't what we consider to be the ideal family structure. We don't ever pay attention to the fact that the suburbs have a problem too. Middle-class families have a problem too. If you think that your middle class and your kid's school is all that, you really need to dig in a little bit. And but the reason that we get away with that is because we talk about the achievement gap so much.
Yeah. But you're right, because when you are comparing yourself to a standard that is still mediocre, then you're going to be
Right.
Everybody's going to be okay with mediocre. So, for example, Tennessee used to have their state grading system where they did an A through F for districts. Well, at the distance between an A and F was only 15 points, but an F was could be a 45, an A could be, the scale was still 100, so we were still lying about it and saying like we don't even know if 100 is possible. But so what we're going to do is, what are the highest numbers that districts are getting, and that's the A. And so that's where we have a problem.
Yeah, years ago when we were talking about common standards, part of the idea was that we were going to have something objective so that people could stop gaming the system. So states could stop, setting what is proficient at wildly different levels, so that in West Virginia, what you just said, an A in one state for a kid would be an F in another state, would just be all over the map. How do you turn these things, though, into activism, Kenya? Because I feel like, when I watch education forums, we have lots of people from the community that get organized. They do show up. Sometimes the people that prepare them to show up only have one thing in mind. So they stand up and they say constantly to leaders, what are you going to do to fully fund, fill in the blank? Fully fund more teachers, pay teachers what they're worth, whatever. And it starts to sound a little bit like it's somebody else's agenda if that's all you ever talk about, because I'm kind of hungry for someone to stand up and say, what are you going to do when you are elected to make sure we have the right teachers who have had the right preparation, who have the right way of proving that they're actually doing a good job? What are you going to do when you're elected to make sure that what we're talking about right now is fixed, that the majority of our kids are getting grade level assignments? Those are brass tacks. Those are real things. How do we get there?
But that's a muscle that you build with communities to help them to be able to know how you ask, because we have, I would say, dumbed down democracy, and we actually don't engage people in critical conversations. We miss the opportunity to have people engage at a deeper level. And so what people ask for many times is the basic needs. It's no different than what you would do in your own life. Like, if you just give me the money, then I can figure out the other things. And so that's a belief that we've done in this work for a long time, but we actually can't leave districts, CMOs, or anyone to their own devices, because these are our children, and we should be co-designing, and we should be co-designing from a equity principle from the beginning. There are people who are doing this, though, so I want to highlight that. So when we started with Common Core, one of the examples we would talk about all the time is a Mississippi A and a Massachusetts A were fundamentally different. Well, I would say Mississippi is cutting up lately, and so Mississippi, it really, both in the way that their parents engaged and said, we don't want to be at the 50th state anymore. Then they had leadership from people like Cortez Moss, who said, like, hey, I can think about the instruction, and we can ground our teachers. We can look at our problems. So at the core, they were like, our children cannot read. We know how to teach kids to read. We don't have to settle on that being a permanent truth. So they then focused on, how did they retrain their teachers on the science of teaching? How did they then work with the universities on thinking about that from the way that teachers were prepped to come into the schools? How then did they work with parents and community members to understand the science of reading? And you now are seeing through the state's NAEP scores, kids in Mississippi know how to read. And so we can do this. We just have to understand the problem, begin to co-design solutions, think about the solutions throughout multiple angles. So not just in like what the parents should be doing. Don't come just tell me read to your baby in an extra 20 minutes. That's great, but you need to be teaching from a science and data-driven strategy in the schools during that time. No one should be, I mean, I agree. I despise being mediocre. Like, we need to ascribe to a spirit of excellence. And I think that we as people of color and know what that is. We have not always been given opportunity or access to engage in that way. And those are things that what I hope that COVID reveals is how do we do things differently and how do we own our own power. And then the other piece is we have seen change does not have to take the time that people have previously said that it did. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I hope people get out of this. People would have had always said, oh, you can't get them to do that. The states would never increase food stamp allocations, or we would never be doing this. We did a whole bunch of stuff in the course of 6 weeks to be able to save it, both capitalism and what we were saying, community. And now, because the communities, in my opinion, who are impacted the most are communities of color, we are now reprioritizing capitalism over humanity.
Mm. You know, when I hear all of this, everything you just said to me says that there is what we have always called education reform has always been predicated on the idea that you can improve the system. You can look at the problems, figure out what solutions are, and it can be better. So you don't just accept the outcomes for what they are. You say, I'm an engineer. This is a system. Engineers look at systems. They find the parts of them that are broken, and they actually add new pieces of pipe, new pieces of whatever you want to put in the system to make it work. But in many ways, educational reformers have lost that debate because what I call educational essentialism has really kicked in, where that side wins when they basically just say, listen, if you are poor and you come to school not knowing 30 million words, there's a 30-word million difference between you and everybody else, which just, let me say as an aside, anybody listening to this, is such a great example of modern scientific racism that we suck down and we believe uncritically in so many ways. And even so-called educated people of our own walk around trotting out that crazy ass study and piece of scientific racism as if it's gospel. It's the basis of educational essentialism, which basically just says wherever you start, those characteristics of you are immutable. They're not going to change. You're poor, your family isn't the way that we think a family should be. You blah, blah, blah. That'll tell us all we need to know. You're done. You're a done deal. But you come along saying, no. Wait a second. You can improve teaching. You can improve reading. You can improve evaluation. You can improve all these things. And the difference is going to be night and day.
Exactly.
Those two things. But we're losing that battle, Kenya. Like that argument is losing.
We are losing the battle because we have sold parents a bill of goods around this from a individualized education place rather than a community-wide education place. So when there was a school that I went to go visit in New Orleans, and what we would consider an extremely good charter school, when you dug deep into their data, like the kids actually weren't learning. And now, have you shared this with your parents? Yes. The parents interpret that as those children are doing poorly, but not my child. And so because we have lied to families for so long and given parents their children A's, they are not understanding like, hey, my child actually might not be an A student. So I'm working with the data you give me. So one piece we have to do is be more transparent about where children are and what that actually means. So unpacking what an A means to a parent, unpacking what state level of data when it comes back from those assessments, what that actually means. So I love Fontes and Pinnell in the fact that you can know which level your baby should be on. I think if we translated that into, I don't really want to understand a P or like a pH and whatever that level. I just need you to say, what I would want to know is first grade 1 month, this is where you're at. If we did fifth grade 2 months, I could actually tell the difference between if my child is literally in the 7th grade, but all the data is saying that they are at 15 months. Those are things that we can do to help translate that and get parents to be able to demand more. So that's one piece that I think is critical to the system. The other piece around systems changing, I believe that, and I believe that you have to have like a hybrid model of education delivery in communities too. But many people, such as myself, my mom loved me. She worked 3 jobs. So her access to education was going to be through that traditional school system. And because in most communities, at 90% of our children at high, you have some communities where 50 are in charters and 50 are district. That a majority of kids are still in those institutions. We cannot leave them and say we're going to innovate around the edges and hope this institution improves. We actually need to be more focused on improving both. And that's one of the things that I hope during this time, kids didn't get separated in a community based upon COVID. So we actually need to be thinking about all of those players coming together and saying what they are going to do. Charters actually are in a better place in many cases because they were dealing with what should this change look like for a smaller set of students. But places like Success, even like they've done an exceptional job of thinking through how they're going to do education delivery. How are we sharing that with others across the country so we have higher expectations of what we're delivering in the fall?
I want to read a quote from Nehemiah Frank in Oklahoma. Says, "We are losing because we have progressives who are politicizing the education of Black family choices. That's why we are losing. Unions scream from the ivory tower how we should be teaching our children or how we don't know how to teach our children. By our children, I mean Black children." So, I think what Nehemiah is pointing out is a reality of all this that we talk about. Is there different kinds of reforms and reformers and people in the political process of education? What you just said, there are some reformers who believe that we can have great superintendents who change a system, change school systems and school districts and schools. There are some reformers who believe that you can do that, but only if you have some outside, partnerships and help and you innovate outside. Then there's some people who are so-called reformers who believe, y'all do that, go for it. But I'm going to need to go outside of the system because I'm so frustrated with the amount of stasis and bureaucracy and tape. And you're crazy if you think that system is going to make you more sane. That system's going to make you more crazy before you make it sane, right? So
and I don't think it has.
I agree with that last group more, though.
I know you do. We talk about this all the time. That's where you sit. I sit closer to the middle because I believe that there are things that what I would want to see in districts do is if we disaggregated the data and districts knew which kids are we doing a good job of delivering education to and which kids are we not. And then we work in partnership to be able to say, hey, we actually do need a charter because we need someone to come and take over middle schools because we have no understanding of how to deliver that well. We actually do elementary extremely well in many communities across the country. Middle school, not so and high school, you get 2 good high schools in most communities where you should be comfortable with sending your kids. A lot of the other ones aren't great in major cities. But I also want us to be careful about the rhetoric of that institution can't be changed. Institutions will change with people who are demanding their change. So when you have we're saying the union says one thing, where is the work that Carrie is doing across the country of building a parent union, the work that the Powerful Parent Network is doing around building parent power and demand? For me, that can't just be parents, though. So in Memphis, 60% of families don't have children in our public schools. But
I'll say that again. How many?
60%.
Wow, the majority
in the community don't have children. And so in the public school system. So, but I still pay taxes. And so if that's the case, then I still have to be given a way to engage beyond just the delivery of education to a group of children. And we need to be talked about, we need to be talked to around how does a good school system impact our economy? Jobs come, you talk about the old, when Amazon was thinking about the Amazon 2 headquarters. One of the things that I think is most fascinating about that was the criteria that they said that they wanted for a city to be. For me, that gives you a blueprint now as activists to begin to think about how do we improve transportation? How do we improve education? how do we have strong arts and culture? Because that's what they're saying. For us to come to a place, this is what you need to have. That threw a whole bunch of places out because we end up being like logistics hubs, and not have strong education systems. So this is critical when we're thinking about economic prosperity of communities and economic mobility of our students. We just have to think differently about how we're doing this work.
This is, Kenya, where you sound very optimistic. Like you said earlier, Tim Daly's optimistic.
Yep.
This is where you bump into my cynicism. Minneapolis is a good example. I bring it up all the time because it's the closest one to me, and it's one I know the most about. So everybody in their own communities have probably a longer vision, a longer term memory about their own community. And so here in Minneapolis, we just, for the third time probably in 12 or 15 years, have had a radical new plan pitched by a superintendent that moved all the deck chairs around, moved like where the magnet schools are going to be and the zones, the boundaries, and had almost zero in it about what they were going to do to improve our crappy ass reading program. We can't teach kids to read. We can't teach them to be numerate. It had nothing in it that was academic. It had everything in it that was the same bell and whistles, the same PowerPoint you're going to see come every couple of years. When people don't know what to do, they do fancy stuff. They create PowerPoints that has all this stuff in it. The maps change and the directions. So we had community involvement in this that was trying to shut that down and stop the district from putting out a massive plan that had nothing to do with academics. And they passed it over the objections of members of the community and activists and parents and parents of all colors. Parents of color were banding together. It was going to have a massive impact on English language learners and the Black community, for instance, right? And they passed it anyways. Has nothing in it about academics. We're going to have another, decade of ice age of not knowing how to teach.
And I hear you. So. And even if they do pass it, what is the continual advocacy that you all are planning as a community? That we will come and we will share data with you every week, and even if that data is collected in our own communities. So Lakeisha, who reach, she said, I don't trust the data that y'all are saying around reading our children's literacy and numeracy. So we're going to train a cadre. We're going to ask volunteer teachers to come in and let us create a community assessment. We're going to assess our children ourselves, and then we're going to come back to you with that data, and then we're going to ask you to co-design a plan with us instead of you just taking it and doing it on your own. We have to think it much more innovatively about how we are pushing districts and how we're moving this work. So I don't think that we can concede even when we lose. We just got to think about, okay, what do we do differently? Who do we change on the board that actually decided to vote against us in this community process? And how do we let them know that we don't support that? Like we have to, the problem is the work is complex and we want something a little bit easy. We want to just say, go and do X. No, keep changing the board. I know because you served before. It could be changing the superintendent. It also could be changing a whole bunch of people who never get seen. And so who are the people underneath that get into the roles and sometimes get a little stagnant? And that's not, I want to
get a little stagnant. They become more than a little stagnant, Kenya.
Yes, but I'm just saying, it's not just education. So very few jobs now are you going to be in a career for your entire lifetime. And one of the reasons why I actually think that's a good thing is because it allows you to learn from different fields so that you can be able to go back. When we've had people who have only seen one thing sometimes, and they don't have a culture of continuing learning in their district, and how they operate, they then do things the same way that we have done it in the past.
I'm looking at a couple of the comments here. Heather Harding says, continuing advocacy even when faced with loss. I think that, the resiliency of activists and activism and advocacy is something that you have to try and keep up the resiliency and keep things going. But what I know from local activism here is when you go out to try and organize people, you face a lot of community cynicism about we've been there, we've done that. It didn't make a difference before. It's not going to make a difference now, right? Like, you need to get excited about this school board election. There's so much at stake. Yeah, I know. You know what? You've been telling us that for about 30 years. We've been through many school board elections. We've elected people. We've got them up there. This is what I heard when I knocked on a bunch of doors running for myself was, we put y'all up there. You change. You don't do anything for us, whatever. And that's the first hurdle you have to get over when you're organizing. It's just the cynicism built up over time, right?
But that scab is from the reality of the trauma or lack of follow through of promises. And so it isn't from just people just saying, oh, I don't care and I don't believe. And so one of the things that you have to do is fulfill those promises, and people need micro wins to stay engaged. It's just like weight loss. So you need to see 1 or 2 pounds gone for you to stay wanting to eat this salad instead of going back to my wonderful Cheez-Its. And so like those are things that we have to create in similar models for communities. So this is where I find it dangerous in the ed reform space that we try to think about. We want people to think about the highest, most complex issue. So we're like, teacher evaluation is extremely important. It is. Teachers need feedback. But families, when they're saying my school is not safe, for them, that's highest priority. And so we think that's not our work. We only work on this. I need to work on the issues that are most important and most proximal to parents, and they get wins on those issues so that they can stay on and then be able to do some of the more complex changes that take place over time. And we sometimes don't understand the progression of that leadership ladder that we need to take parents through.
I really love that point. I can't remember which guest it was. I'll figure it out at some point. But, had in as part of their teaching program, you don't make kids struggle until you have them succeed on some things. So if you're breaking down a lesson, give them some wins in the lesson and they will persist, right?
Yes.
And I thought, wow, that's, you don't go straight for the rigor, for the thing that's going to kill them or knock them out. What you just said, micro wins, give people some hopes that what they're doing makes sense, makes a difference. I like that.
And some hope that it'll change. So let's use your district as an example. What is the piece that the superintendent and the community both value that then y'all can come back to him and say, in addition to the moving the chairs piece, we know this is something you care about. Can we co-design this? So what that builds is relationship and trust. So when we're coming back to you about this academic plan that we're not seeing, I might not be able, the person may not be able to absorb a full wholesale academic shift, but you might be able to say, can we focus on X in these communities in particular for this period of time and see it? So then they need micro wins as well. Like we think that these people aren't people many times and don't treat them like that they need the same thing in their schools and classrooms.
So on that last point, again, you keep bumping up against my cynicism. So I think what our community values is progress and the fact that we are a northern city, we're a northern metropolitan area that is one of the worst places to raise a Black family in the United States. So it's one of the best places to raise a white family in the United States, top of the list for many things.
Yeah.
One of the best in the country. If you are white and you have children and you want to raise a strong family, come to Minnesota. This is one of the best places in the country. It's the number 2 or 3 worst place to raise a Black family in the United States. So you got to get your mind around that fact. When you talk about what the superintendent values versus what the community values. Now, you said in Memphis, it's 60-something%. 80% of Minneapolis families don't have kids in public schools.
I got you.
So it's a very white, college-educated, aging group that has $1 million homes, that has a school system right in the middle of it that's full of kids of color that don't have the same kind of economic standing, right? So that's the dynamic. When you are a superintendent in Minneapolis, you have 1 or 2 things you can do. One, You can either do what rich white people want you to do, the people who in your school system who have the nice homes around the lakes and whatnot, who show up to school board meetings and they let you know very clearly, if you don't do what they want you to do, they will organize and get you out of there. Or you can listen to what people of color want you to do and make things better for them. And that puts you up against a teachers union, the white families who want their privilege in the schools and in the way that the system is designed. I'm just actually like laying out my cynicism for you. That's real. This is what the community too knows. So if you came here and tried to organize, this is what the community would know already, right? When I say the community, I mean the community that's not well served. So in some ways, it's hard to find common ground between what the superintendent wants and what the people want.
I understand.
Because the superintendent's got a $300,000 paycheck that actually stays real steady as long as he takes care of the people with privilege, not the people who need better leaders.
So I am a person of faith, and I believe that we have a moral obligation to take care of the least of these. When you have people who do not sit in that place of moral obligation, it is easy to sit in where I'm only going to listen to the majority and think about what happens to the minority. And so we need to be bolder about actually asking people what they're going to prioritize and have them walk and live into that. So a good example for me around that in leadership right now is the work that Richard Carranza is doing in New York. Like making folk in Park Slope mad. And so he is saying, Park Slope, y'all good. Y'all gonna do some extra stuff for your kids that because of your access to privilege and money, you can. But it's some kids over here in the Bronx that are not going to do that unless I remediate. So I'm gonna take from you to give to them. It doesn't mean that you're gonna be completely diminished, but what I'm going to do is try to level out what has been such long-term inequity. And you need them to operate like that, and for people who are going to work from a place of more courage. Because if your job is just to be a wind sail that goes back and forth, you are not a leader. And so that's where some people who are in these positions, they are not operating from a place of leadership, and they are missing the moral responsibility that you have to operate under to do this work well. And so that's where we need to be pushing people as well around, if you're going to do just for them, then you should not be in this place.
You know, one of the another organizing challenge, you mentioned New York. So this is what's resonating with me. Yeah. One of the organizing challenges that we have is what we have talked about in this discussion about the opportunity myth and about the way that the brass tacks work in instruction and evaluation and the system. Like that's what education is. Education is a system of ways to educate, right? And pedagogy and whatever. But when it comes to organizing, we talk about the things that are more emotional and more emotive. And we use words like equity and no one knows what they mean. We talk about race and class, but we don't talk about what, you know, the opportunity myth, like how race and class is playing out in what we give students. New York is a great example where they're doing work around race, they're doing work around equity, and they also spent almost $1 billion on a plan that didn't work on signature schools. That wasn't really a plan around how you educate. It was one more time of let's give the people candy instead of a real education meal, right? And people love candy. They love candy. We're going to talk about equity, you know, cultural competence. We're going to get Glenn Singleton in here to do some courageous conversations, and everybody's going to, like, you know, all the white teachers are going to sit in a circle, and we're going to have equity. Are they going to be able to teach? Right. So for me as an activist, I'm still wanting to get to this place, and you're the best person, I think, one for me to help keep thinking this through is when we talk about community meetings, how we do get to the part where we're like, part of this agenda has to be about who teaches, how they teach, how they were prepared to teach, what they're teaching, instead of just all the candy around the fringes.
So I come from the Ella Baker School, Ella didn't go and ask people to then just give us free. Like, she was specific around what are the actions that I want you to change in the way that you are our people, and so that we can then see change on that. So I want us to do some of that. So it is like, if we're saying, people know their teachers who are good or not, because guess what we do? When you have girlfriends who have children of your same age, you call them and say, who was the best teacher for fourth grade for when Jackson went to Idlewild? That's what we do. We don't then think about, if we really can only pick from 2 teachers, what are we doing with the other 10 that are teaching fourth grade, and how do we change that? So this is where I go back to, we must move from an individualist space to a collective space. And how do we then think about the responsibility to the collective? That's another piece for me about Minnesota, because just because white folks are okay, we rise and fall as a community. So just like you're seeing significant health disparities in who is impacted by COVID, it does not, you are not automatically protected just because you got a gate and you white or the neighborhood. So if we can push to understand the interconnectivity and get them to understand the why and what, and move to the place of what act needs to change. It has been done. Like when Charlotte Mecklenburg said, we're going to do better when we have 30%, or we have diversity, and diversity looks like this, that we're going to have no more than 30% of anything, whether it be poverty, whether it be levels of race, and we are going to bring them together, and we're going to co-educate them. We're not going to just separate off in tracks. We saw amazing improvement, but what that did was scare some people. Like, if we really improve all of this and we don't have some people who are going to go into these logistics and factories, we might not have workers. We have to actually push against that spirit of mediocrity that people want for some people, and really figure out how we do this work differently, in my opinion. And I think from a community perspective, for me, that's where I go back to. Communities need to be involved in more than just what are the bake sales and the school lunches, but with getting them engaged in, but thinking about the teacher quality, the teacher preparation, the way that we are structuring schools. Like right now, what I'm really concerned with, we are talking about opening schools back without talking to parents and without thinking through like how, and students, how they're going to be impacted by like some of the changes that we're going to have to go through. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be sitting in right now.
Well, it's still a sign that we're not seeing parents as partners.
Yes.
We're seeing them as maybe consumers of some sort. Like, we're treating them in somewhat like we own not we, but institutional leaders are seeing it as, this is our institution. We will tell you how we're going to serve you, moving forward.
And they also see themselves as a necessity rather than an option. And so when people see themselves as a necessity, and you're going to come to me regardless, then they don't think about how I'm going to market, how I'm going to engage you, how am I going to let you know that this is quality, how I'm going to provide exceptional service. That's why I believed in charters, because I wanted everybody to understand, like, how do we have high quality. But what people right now, and I mean everybody, whether that be charters or districts, and parents are going to exercise options that we don't even know exist yet. A friend of mine, Brian Wilson, and his wife are in Texas. They now have recreated freedom schools, because when we first had this, 12 of their friends worked in roles that were essential or mid-essential. They couldn't leave small children at home. Brian and his wife are teachers, but they also are abolitionists by spirit. And so they said, we can take on the education of our children. You will have underground education happening across the country. And how do we both empower that and not feel threatened? Because this could lead to us having much more highly educated citizens And how do we coordinate that? Because if in the school year, when it begins, you look at Paris, you look at Korea, places that have opened up, kids ended up getting corona, and
Oh, wow.
shut them back down again, because we don't think about we think in an isolationist mentality as the US, and so we are not tracking what's happening around the country. And so we're going to have schools that where kids go back, and then we'll have outbreaks again. We need to be thinking about how do we think about the delivery of service. And then there are going to be some families like mine. I'm not sure my nieces are going to go back to a traditional school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I'm comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to think about what their education should look like next year is what we're discussing as a family and a community, not just my sister. She is not doing that on her own. We're all discussing what we need to do.
I'm pretty sure that my kids aren't going back to regular school this year for sure. So it's a 2021 discussion for us as my family. But that does open up questions about then what are we going to do? And you're hitting on all of them. What are we going to do? Who can we tap into with each other? What information can we pool? We're in kind of like a DIY situation right now as a community, not as individuals, but
And I agree it's a little bit DIY, but for me, this is where we could lean in and be our best selves. So we can think about all of the people and the institutions that we have known were institutions that we never really tapped into. So an example is in Birmingham, there are 1,300 barbers and beauticians that people go to regularly. And how do you think about it beyond just the reading of a book, that we are talking about what's happening with education if people are going to be in those places? That's one like micro piece. The macro is what I was saying about the churches and nonprofits that service youth. You need to now be convening all of them, sharing with them the data around what is happening, how they think about social distancing, but you need to be working with them so everybody is retweaking to understand we are now deliverers of education to children. May not be done in the same way that you do it in your school with a full-time teacher. But what I have to think about how during the time that I will have them, how do we help? How do we extend learning? And think about, I believe the extracurricular activities are extremely important to arts, music, and science. Our arts and music are important to long-term development as well. But we can't just think of them as the people who do those things and not education as well. So that's where I get to and we have systems that we don't use. So think about an example of if a city, we are already give badges to our children and they are scanning in every day. That's how we keep attendance in many schools. What if we shared that with the broader city and created an educational coalition that everybody had the system and every place where your child could go, we could track and they would get information around this is the standard that they should be learning right now. And then this is how you can work with them on it. We open source all of the programs that we're having kids work on. So if we're using Kaplan in school, we're giving the church Kaplan for free. So then having that time. This is where we need to be thinking differently and innovating more as we are working with communities.
So you just hit on something that I think is it is one of the ways forward, I think, in terms of preparing communities to take on the role of being the deciders for their kids, the best advocates, which is having tools and knowing what the tools are. You mentioned earlier that, you love Fontis, but, and I think a lot of people listening don't know what Fontis is, right? And that's something that if you're inside education, you know exactly what it does for you, what it assesses, how it deals with reading and all that. But if you're a parent, you don't. What we've learned in COVID is many parents, and myself included, scrambled when we first had our kids home to patch together whatever little programs we could get. And in terms of the assessing of where your kids are at. Now, this is going to sound like a bad analogy, but you're going to get it, I think, possibly because we both lived in the South. We're gonna see. We're gonna see. I can remember kids as a kid growing up, my grandmother and others would talk about the rabbit dying, right? And I always wondered what the hell was going on with this rabbit dying somewhere right now. And I still don't know 100% how this worked, but there was a pregnancy test that had something to do with rabbits and them dying, whatever. And it was a way to test, I guess, pregnancy on a more grassroots level, because you couldn't always go to a doctor. And for a period of time, just testing for pregnancy was not something you could do at home, right? And it became a point now where you can run to a Walgreens, at midnight now and run and grab your little test and do it at home. And you can know whether or not something so life-changing like a pregnancy is happening and occurring. You can't do that with reading necessarily. The schools and school districts hold all the keys still to assessing, the tools to assessing where your kids are. So if a church or a clergy or a community or an activist group said, we want to have a session with all of you, we're going to do it on a Saturday, and we're going to teach you how to, at home, answer the question for yourself: are your kids on grade level?
Exactly.
Are they getting grade level stuff? We need the tools to do that.
And so this is where I was highlighting the work that Lakeisha and Oakland Reach have done around literacy assessment. She was like, I know I cannot assess a child longer than 20 minutes. And so if I'm trying to get this volunteer and get 20 or 30 minutes to get parents to come in. So in that 20 or 30 minutes, they worked with an assessment provider out of San Francisco to be able to think about how could we get information on where kids are. So it's not impossible. We just have not chosen to do that because, and I'm not even completely sure why. So what I've been thinking about, Chris, is what if we had started COVID process off where we actually gave parents, instead of saying, go find what you need to do through this tsunami of resources, because we gave y'all that. What if we just said, take 30 to 45 minutes and work with your child through where are they able to answer these questions of where they are on each of these levels, to where we could then say, wow, the district says your baby is in 5th grade. This assessment actually shows that your baby is in 3rd grade reading, 4th grade science, 5th grade math, and this is now the information that you need to get. That's an advocacy opportunity that we could be pushing for in our positions, but also getting parents to push for data transparency. And data transparency is more than just like an A, or what an A is and what a B is, which we've now gotten comfortable with. It is actually getting them to understand where my child is and what is the plan that we can do with an individualized learning plan for them. So that's part of what I believe is necessary in this new education arena.
I think what you're helping me to see in this time, and we're coming close to time here, is the need to change advocacy and what's considered activism from being about episodic episodes of changing policies and laws and showing up just in time for decision making, and changing from that to being more proactive about the things that we know are high value activities in terms of change. Do we want to change how kids are taught, what they're taught, where they're taught, who teaches them, how the prep for those teachers happens? In your report, in the opportunity myth, there's some things here that just seem like straight up brass tacks, like, 5 things here. We want to make sure that all students and families they know directly or ask them directly about their goals and school experiences, so we can have that information, make greater access to grade appropriate assignments available to them, make it an urgent priority. So when I hear things like urgent or whatnot, that means activism. Like, you have to be pushing your school board, your school leaders. And if this isn't on your activist agenda, to show up to school boards and school leaders and say, no, damn it, we want to know. First of all, we want the information to know what the access is right now.
Exactly.
Tell me right now, we need some information. You haven't told us about this. So tell me more about this. How many kids are suffering this opportunity myth in our school system? Once you have the information is power, because now you can say, now we need you to improve this.
That's exactly what we need. So this is what we need. You and everyone, us, not just you. Like, we have a responsibility to our community and our parents and most importantly, our kids. Like, we see now, when you think about who was impacted by COVID, it has not even just health wise, economic wise, has been communities of color. If we don't think about how we prepare them differently, people who are working in hospitality, who work in grocery stores, like those have been our employment places, and really Black women. Like I feel like in particular, if I was to say anything that I would shift in my work, we would do some Black women work. And how are we working with the both parents? This is where you were visionary about that, and I don't know if we even caught it then. And around investing in Black women will save the entire country around education, and we need to do more of that work.
I'm so glad you hit on that. My colleague, my god sister, Nakima Levy-Pounds, who now runs the Wayfinder Foundation, that's her work, and investing directly in women in communities as a strategy for changing the whole world.
Exactly.
Right. It wasn't just a strategy. It was a strategy. I say it all the time. All around the world, we have figured out that if you invest in women and girls, you change nations. That's considered nation building. Used to be the opposite. We used to think that if you invest in men, they're the breadwinners, they will raise up their whole families. And what we figured out was that was a losing strategy for years. That's what people in poverty work internationally have figured out. In the United States, we take the opposite track. We feel like punishing women with children is the way to get them to comply, whatever. Not seeing that they're actually, what if they were the solution, not the problem? United States look at them as a problem, and that's our problem. That really is our problem. It's because they are the solution. Well,
Chris,
as we wrap here, go ahead.
Can I hit on two things? One,
sure.
Christina, I fundamentally agree that every child needs an individual education plan, and that's part of what we need to ask for. We don't need the work that SPED has laid a foundation for on this is there. And so we need to be able to think about how do we ask for that? And then how do we move it from being litigious or paper only process for function and not really for us to actually get what we need. But the other thing, Chris, I want to highlight, while I'm saying we need to focus on more complex issues, we do need to be monitoring what happens with policy right now more than ever. Because while we talked about the fight for funding is what you hear, we actually need to think about how are we going to protect our schools, because we do a very archaic way of funding schools across the country based upon property taxes in many places, which when these go property or sales taxes, our sales tax revenue is going to be lower and across the country. So we need to make sure that our children are protected during these upcoming legislative budget cycles. And how are we at the table as governors are trying to think about, when you don't have as many resources, where are you going to pull those dollars from? And many times our kids are the ones who are on the chopping block first.
We always say this thing, activists and organizers get into saying the same things over and over again. So this thing around, like, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We've been saying that for years. I get it. But if you're not at the table with a plan, like just being at the table and seeing and observing what's going on, you also need to go back and help make sense of the policies with real people so that they know what it's about.
This is where your piece around who is teaching, how are we looking at the diversity of our teachers in our schools and their ability to be able to instruct effectively? What are the quality of those teachers? How are we thinking about the quality of the content that we are giving to students? How are we creating cycles of feedback with our teachers so they're thinking about improvement on a regular basis? How are we thinking about the entirety of the academic experience? And then most importantly, how are we asking children about the experience of the education that they are getting? Because they know and they can tell us every day, and they can tell us from every grade level. Kindergartners know what their education is as well as high school. And so we need to be much more connected and proximal, as I said, to the people who are having the experience. And we need to make that a priority.
I always learn so much from you. I'm just so blessed to know you over time, and I'm so glad because I always learn something with you. And this time, I've learned too much because now I've got like 8 things in my mind floating around that I have to go back and follow up on. This is what happens to me when I talk to Dr. Howard Fuller. It's like I end up with needing, to follow up on some things, and it stops me from talking to him too often because he gives me too much work to do. But I enjoy these conversations with you. Will you come back again?
Chris, you got me.
Okay.
The one plug I'll put in, like the work that I am most excited about now is the work of Reconstructionism that Kaya Henderson and them are around rethinking about education through education liberation. Like, y'all pay attention because this is going to be really instrumental in helping our people. And last but not least, we cannot sleep on what's happening and think people are going to take good care of us if we don't force them to. So in the next 6 to 8 weeks, as your district is planning how schools should start, it don't matter if they made go to those meetings and make them put them on Zoom and go listen in. And then you tell 10 other women and you all think about that. And then you determine as a community, what do you want to see for your children going forward? And stop thinking that other people have the knowledge and expertise to tell you when you have the experience and the connection to children where and you can combine those two so we can get knowledge and community. And then for me, that is when we're going to see true education happening in our communities. It's always a blessing, Chris.
It's always a blessing with you. And I'm so excited to keep working on this. There's so many gems in what we just talked about with you giving us kind of guidelines, the things to think about that are specific, hard, tangible, clear, rather than what we allow these issues to get too cloudy and too muddy and whatnot. We just got to clear it up for people. And you just have a clear way of always doing that. For people listening and watching, this has been Kenya Bradshaw with TNTP. She is long-term advocate on behalf of our children. So you really should seek her out, check her out. On the bottom of the screen, you have seen her Twitter handle going by. And I think you should connect with her, follow her. And we should all keep talking about this because I love what you say about this being a collective situation. We're not going to win alone. We're not going to win this as individuals. I'm not going to win for my family if we don't win together. That's on right. All of these things. So I love this idea around the Black Reconstruction work too. So we're going to talk about that in a future program more. But here's some of the brass tacks that I want to just follow up on. Leaving this is we have time right now. We're at home to be rethinking some things. We need to be talking to each other. We need to be connecting to each other through Zoom. We need to be forcing transparency on our school districts, whether they want it or not, right? So things like making sure that they are broadcasting their meetings in a way that everybody can see online, making sure that we're having 2, 3, 4, 5 people meetings with each other to say, what did we just see? And what are they lying about? What are they telling the truth about? Where do they need our help? Where do they need our pressure, right? That's something we can do for free. You and I can do that, 4 or 5 of us, watch the school board meetings, put pressure on them to think brass tacks. Tell us what the information is around grade level assignments in your school district. Where are our kids, whatnot, because we can't even keep you accountable if we don't have a baseline.
That's right.
We don't share the same information, share the same data. And when I say we, the sharing of that can't be just in the school system anymore. It's got to be outside, like the community. There needs to be a community trust of information that exists outside of the system that we all can access and work with together. Churches, clergy, nonprofit leaders, families, but all together. I love what you said about the collective, not just the individual. So, Kenya, thank you. I appreciate you.
You have a wonderful day.
Everybody watching, listening, please, if you appreciate the show, share it with others, share the link to others. I appreciate you so much. Every day I'm learning. I'm glad that that we started doing this because the comments that you bring to the table, the things that you bring here, it's actually enriching every day for my understanding of the world. So hopefully you get something out of it too. So thank you all.